Let's be honest, the Scott Pilgrim anime is incredible. Set to be a retelling of the cult classic graphic novel series Scott Pilgrim, the new Netflix adaptation Scott Pilgrim Takes Off certainly expanded on the beloved franchise in the best ways. Let's get into it. Episode 1 starts off with our barefoot protagonist wandering through a dream desert of loneliness, fantasizing about the girl of his dreams. Scott is a bit of a mooch and plays bass in a band with his buddies. -2 points. Scott heads to a party with his too cool for school bandmates and immediately finds himself alone wandering around when he sees the girl of his dreams. He's like 50% good at flirting. After fumbling the pink-haired baddie, Scott gets some intel on her and finds out that she delivers DVDs for Netflix. The good old days. The girl of Scott's dreams, Ramona Flowers, shows up when she delivers a DVD that Scott strategically ordered. Scott is quick on the draw and asks her out before she disappears from him again. Ramona agrees. +1 point. After a heartwarming date, quote-unquote, between the two, Scott is invited to Ramona's place, and after some steamy anticipation, they decide to spend a platonic night together. Scott is super cool about it. +1 point. Meanwhile, we see that Ramona has pretty heavy baggage when we're introduced to two of her evil exes. They're in some sort of league of supervillain bitter boys gathering intel on Scott to ruin his chances with Ramona. They expose Scott for dating an underage high schooler, Knives Chow. Wait, so she's 17 and Scott is 23? -5 points. Scott's gay roommate Wallace lays into Scott to break up with his high school kinda girlfriend, and after Scott invites both Knives and Ramona to his band's show, he finds himself at a terrible impasse. No time to mourn his poor decisions though, as Ramona's first evil ex, Matthew Patel, shows up and stops the concert short when he beats the change out of Scott. Actually, he kills Scott. Wait, then what's the point of having a point system? In episode 2, Matthew takes his victory as validation for his love of Ramona. Unfortunately, Ramona doesn't really go for the violent, punchy vibe. Well, Scott's dead, and Ramona and all his friends show up to his funeral, when Scott's big ex, Envy Adams, shows up and steals the show. To celebrate the defeat of their nemesis, the League of Evil Exes is invited to Gideon, the leader's lair. Turns out Matthew Patel is the one who invited them all to the lair. Bitter over his trophyless victory, Matthew declares that the League deserves a new direction and a new leader. Matthew challenges the League's leader to a battle. Winner takes all. Matthew summons some serious firepower, but Gideon responds with expert swordsmanship, and after trying to gain some ground by escaping, Matthew gets cornered by Gideon, and the two end up in an epic standoff on the rooftops of the headquarters. After reigning victorious, Matthew legally takes control over all of Gideon's assets, including the loyalty of the entire League. Ramona, though seemingly detached, finds herself mourning the loss of Scott. Through her dreams, Ramona discovers that Scott is still alive. In episode 3, we open up on young Neil, who, inspired by Scott's death, is working on his own screenplay. He's about as good at writing as SpongeBob. In the middle of the night, Neil wakes to find a mysterious figure at his computer. I hope you deleted your browsing history, bro. Oh, it turns out Neil sleep wrote a hit screenplay, or so he believes. Ramona visits Scott's sister and Julie at her workplace and lets her know of the revelation. After reviewing the footage from the night of Scott's death, it turns out her theory might be more of a reality. Hot on the case of Scott's disappearance, Ramona gathers all the information she can to find out exactly what happened. Meanwhile, Scott's bandmates mourn the loss of their ever-important bassist, and Knives and Kim start jamming together. The two of them have some great chemistry, and Kim rushes to work after getting lost in the music. Ramona shows up to Kim's workplace to get more help, and we get a look into Scott and Kim's history. Turns out the two of them dated long ago. Ramona's fourth evil ex shows up unexpectedly and declares a battle. We get a really well-made fight scene between the two as they battle through different movie scenes, and after a tearful exchange, the two make amends. Ramona surrenders to Roxy and offers friendship that Roxy hesitantly accepts. Before episode end, Gideon is found wandering through the rain-soaked streets and is invited in by Julie. In episode 4, we open to Ramona's movie star boyfriend Lucas Lee skateboarding through life as his daily routine of being a cool guy. Turns out his skateboarding cool guy antics have landed him on a potential acting blacklist, and he needs to get it together. He has one last chance to save his career and takes the lead role in a film set in Toronto. In a wild twist, the movie that Lucas Lee is acting in is based on the sleep-written script that young Neil made. Ramona gets shown around the set and questions Lucas to no avail. There's a little drama on set when the actor set to play Wallace is replaced by Wallace himself. The whole movie turns out to be a film set in a world where Scott wins the fight against Matthew and lives happily ever after with Ramona. When the paparazzi barges in on Lucas's trailer, he leaps into battle and takes them all out in the coolest way possible. A skateboard stunt course battle. After the battle, Lucas and Ramona make amends, and Lucas reveals that he's been dropped by his manager. Ramona marks Lucas off of her list of potential Scott nappers, and with him out of the picture, Todd Ingram shows up to take the lead role of Scott in the film. Episode 5 is introduced as a documentary accounting the failure of the not-so-written by young Neil Scott Pilgrim biopic. Ramona takes the job as her own character's stunt double. She's performing a sort of espionage, trying to get close enough to the production so that she can finally get closure on what happened to Scott. Todd and Ramona's actress, Envy Adams, can't really make it through a scene without being all over each other, and so Wallace takes initiative to change the script. This ends up leaving Wallace and Todd Ingram in a steamy vegan entanglement. It doesn't last long though, and after Wallace breaks the news to Todd that their fling was simply that, he vegan teleports away. Envy, jealous of her stolen love, does battle with Wallace and his stunt doubles, grabbing Ramona to help her fight. After Ramona ends the fight, her and Envy confront Todd for starting the affair-centered drama and for more clues on Scott's disappearance. Ramona gets canned and Matthew shows up on the set, firing everyone involved. He's upset that the movie made him look bad, declaring that he beat Scott fair and square, but Ramona reveals to him that that's not quite the case. Either way, Ramona has new leads and heads off to find Julie and Gideon. In episode 6... Wait, what? Oh, Gideon is watching anime. This must be pre-Crunchyroll data leak days. Gideon, now going by Gordon Goose, is reached out to by a dejected Lucas, and the two spark up a fantastical friendship outside of their shared history with Ramona. Back at the band house, Knives and Steven are writing a hit song to add to their musical that they're pitching to Matthew Patel. Knives, Steven, and Kim reveal to young Neil that it wasn't actually him who wrote that hit Scott Pilgrim script. After grilling Julie over her relationship with Gordon, Ramona crosses the two of them off her list. When they get to Julie's house, they discover the same spy robot that's been appearing in small places throughout the series. Lucas tells Ramona that it's the work of the twin X's, and when Ramona gets to the band house, she teams up with the four friends with a final piece to solve the mystery. After deducing that the twin X's and their robot are behind the disappearance of Scott, they hear a knock at the door. It's Scott? Scott shows up out of nowhere and reveals that he is the one that's behind his own disappearance. Thank goodness for Netflix batch dumps, because this cliffhanger would have killed me. In episode 7, we finally see what happened on the fateful night of Scott's disappearance. Scott ended up getting pulled into a time travel portal by himself from the future. A 37-year-old Scott nabs 23-year-old Scott and starts showing him around an overgrown Toronto. Old Scott tells young Scott that the real issues sparked from when they won against the League of Evil X's. Young Scott goes through a VR experience accounting his adventures shown in the early comics and live-action movie, and a little more. Turns out in this future, Scott and Ramona got divorced after 13 years of marriage. In this oddly chill situation, Wallace and Scott live together once again, and Scott is in a band with the twin X's. Old Scott reveals that the twins helped him travel through time to stop young Scott from dating Ramona to completely avoid the heartbreak. Trying to get back to his own time, young Scott teams up with old Wallace to meet old Ramona. Old Ramona reveals that she's also traveled back in time and fixed up young Neil's script, though the plan fell apart due to some poor time travel planning. Old Ramona agrees to help young Scott and brings him back to his time, where we resume the story from the last episode's cliffhanger. Scott finally breaks up with his high schooler girlfriend, plus 6 points. I'm just being generous though, because I got to bring back the point system. Ramona and Scott finally reunite and have their long-awaited happily ever after kiss, but before our lovers can finally love, a mysterious barrier stops them. Scott and Ramona realize that one of her evil exes may be responsible for the force field preventing their kiss. It's off to the premiere of the Scott Pilgrim stage play to find out who's to blame. In the final episode, Scott, Ramona, and friends show up to the premiere of the Scott Pilgrim musical starring Matthew Patel. They figure that either he or one of the evil exes is to blame for the force field preventing them from finally kissing. After confronting each ex and finding that they've actually all moved on, they're stumped as to why this is happening. During the musical, Gideon is about to pull off an evil ploy when suddenly a massive red bubble starts overtaking the stage and absorbs Scott, Ramona, the band, and all of Ramona's evil exes. The group is teleported into a future dimension where they encounter even older Scott from the future. Not one for pleasantries, even older Scott immediately attacks young Scott, angry over the fact that Scott went back to Ramona. It turns out that he is the reason for all the anti-love force field business, and now Scott has to do battle with him if he wants to live his life normally. After even older Scott gives some backstory into why he became so miserable and ripped, the band and Ramona's not so evil anymore exes team up with Scott and Ramona to fight even older Scott. Just before even older Scott can be defeated, he uses his powers to send everyone except for Scott and Ramona back to the musical premiere. Close to giving up, Scott and Ramona are greeted by even older Ramona, who appears just in time to pacify even older Scott. Ramona and her even older counterpart practice some self-love and come together to form a powerful ethereal version of themselves and send even older Scott back to his home to clean up his mess and start making things right with himself. Scott and Ramona are sent back to their own time as well, and they finally get that long-awaited kiss. Sparks fly between the lovers, and Matthew Patel absolves Gideon Graves, or Gordon Goose, giving him back the ownership of the League of Evil Exes. Everything comes to a nice, calm closing, and we get a heartwarming view of the entire cast of characters enjoying their lives the way they should, free of baggage. And that's it! My introduction to Scott Pilgrim was way back in 2010 with the live-action action movie, to be honest, I was not a huge fan. I really missed out on a lot of the greatness of the story until I decided to watch this adaptation. I'm so glad I did though. The retelling really shows me how much fun and retro reference goodness I was missing out on. While I do think that the live action movie still doesn't hold a candle to this incredible Netflix series, I think that this serves as a way to bring in new fans and reignite the old fans' love for it. I guess now I have to play the video game. True.